Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the House Game and Fisheries Committee to order and ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today's meeting of the committee is an informational meeting to discuss House Resolution 129, and that's the resolution that I sponsored that asked the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee to prepare a study dealing with the feasibility of merging the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission and the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Today's meeting is an informational meeting to have the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee come before the committee and explain the study that they've performed, and a chance for the members to ask questions and for us to look at the details. I'd like to start by asking the members to introduce themselves. We'll start with Representative Maloney.
Good morning. I guess I'm the last one in. Berks County, Representative Dave Maloney, 130th. Thank you.
Garth Everett, Lycoming County.
Mark Keller, the 86th, Perry and Franklin.
Good morning, Mike Pfeiffer, 139th districts, which include Pike, Wayne, and Monroe.
Good morning, Marcia Hahn, 138th, Northampton County.
Good morning, Mindy Fee, the 37th in Northern Lancaster County.
Bob Gottschall, Montgomery County.
Marty Causer, I represent McKean, Potter, and Cameron counties.
Gary Haluska, I represent Cambria County.
Good morning. Deborah Cole, Lafayette in Westmoreland County's 52nd District.
Jerry Mullery, 119, Luzerne County.
Pam Snyder, 50th District, Greene, Washington, and Fayette counties.
Greg Lucas, Erie and Crawford County, 5th District.
I want to thank all the members that are here with us today, and I know there are many other committee meetings going on this morning, so we're going to have members coming and going throughout the meeting. Before I call up the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee, I invited Chairman Bob Gottschall to join us this morning. Chairman Gottschall is a member of the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee. He has a lot of historical knowledge on this particular issue, so I've asked Chairman Gottschall to talk about that historical perspective and the knowledge that he has from his time in the legislature on this particular issue. So, Chairman Gottschall.
Thank you. A number of years back, we had a similar situation, and Dave Ludansky, Russ Letterman from the Democratic side, myself, we put a bill together about combining the two agencies, and it raised quite a bit of concern, especially among the agencies. And what I did at that time is I wrote a letter to every one of the wildlife agencies in the whole state of Pennsylvania, or the whole state of Pennsylvania in the country. I wrote everyone an individual letter asking them, knowing you couldn't, but if you could, would you ever look at a single system for combining the two agencies, and what do you see the advantages of a single agency versus a dual agency? I got back approximately 25 letters on that issue, and from the heads of wildlife agencies from 25 states, saying major disadvantage I can see in the two agency system is overlapping jurisdiction and duplication of effort. This would be especially true in administrative functions, education, and enforcement. I can assure you that after 20 years in the wildlife management field, I would never recommend a division of responsibilities in Nevada. A state's wildlife needs one voice to represent it and one to care for it so that no one special interest adversely affects another. Good luck in your endeavor, if I can be of any further assistance. And another, just briefly, I might separate fish and game into two divisions. However, I would not make them separate departments. There are too many ways in which our concurrently coordinated efforts would be stifled or at best complicated, including the application and utilization of shared PR and DJ funding of projects. And that was from Division of Wildlife, South Dakota. But it was basically the same theme. You know, there's one resource. There's a resource out there, whether it's fish and game. It's a one resource, and it's got to be treated by, you know, an individual agency in order to coordinate the efforts. But anyway, after receiving the 25 letters that I got 2 telephone calls in the mail. I got 2 telephone calls and the mail stopped. I got a call from both Ohio and New Jersey, the same thing, and said, we have responded to your questionnaire, but we want to know that the Game Commission got into high gear, and after they found out what was happening, nothing to do with the Game Commission people that are there today. This was back a few years ago, and they have asked us not to respond to your questionnaire. And I got no more letters. So, and what happened in my own case, and I'm not sure about Letterman, I'm not sure about Ladansky, but I had a 4-page brochure put out in my district by the Pennsylvania Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. And in it was, join us in our fight to keep politics out of the Game Commission by defeating Representative Gottschall, and so forth, on and on it went. And I received, and in with these letters were these cards, approximately 500, which were all addressed to me with my name and so forth. And they were all post-paid, and they came back, stick to something you know something about. This idea sucks. With ideas like this, I will never vote for you again. And that was based all on the information that was in this 4-page questionnaire or 4-page brochure that was sent out. At that time, what I did was I decided that I was going to sue the Federation, which I did, for what they said in here, which just plain was not true. And I couldn't figure out where these came from. I mean, these were people in my area and so forth, and I couldn't figure out. And then I found where the common denominator was. I knew they weren't Federation members because they were asking them to join the Federation. So the common denominator was that every one of these people was a subscriber to the Pennsylvania Game News. And zip codes had been transferred from the Game Commission to the Federation with the names of the subscribers to the Game News in my district. And so that's where this whole thing was generated from. So I sued the Federation, and we went through all the preliminaries, everything else was worked out, and then unfortunately I lost my credibility because I said that they were, you know, I was harmed, and I was, you know, I would irrevocably harmed, everything else. I threw every adjective I could think in there. And but the next election came along before the suit was heard, and it was in Montgomery County, by the way, in my county. And they claimed it was a frivolous suit, and which my juror said it wasn't. And so the next election came along, and I ran and I won by a greater margin than I had previously. So that sort of messed up my credibility in my lawsuit. And so what I did then, I had the Federation sent out an apology letter to every one of the people that they had sent out before, that they apologized for some of the statements that they made. And but this is the kind of, you know, this is what's happened over the years. And, you know, of the 25 letters I got from the various states, you know, it was a common theme. You know, we have one resource out there, and we need one agency to manage that resource. We don't need dual agencies. We found out at that time also, by the way, that our agencies in Pennsylvania, which is not the case today, but it was the case then, weren't even talking to each other. I mean, there was no correspondence back and forth. There was none. But at least we've got, if anything came out of what we did then, it was the fact that we had the agencies coming together to at least discuss things. And I guess a typical, I know there's a letter in here from Idaho where the guy says that if guys are up elk hunting in an elk camp, on a mountain, and there's a stream down below, and there's, it's a trout stream down below, and the game warden comes in and says, and checks their license and so forth, and they ask him, can we fish down there? Is the season available? He says, I'm a game warden. I'm not a fish warden. The fish warden's on the other side of the mountain. You have to go ask him, because I don't know. And I think a similar situation happened in Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly, this year, with 2 young men that were bear hunting, and I believe it was up in Potter County or Tioga County, and the fish warden had checked out their licenses. They asked the fish warden pertaining to if it's legal, if bear season was in, how they got 2 bear, I don't know, but they shot 2 bear, took them down to the station to have them checked out, and found out where they were hunting was not legal, but the fish warden had told them it was. They're just back and forth. So, I've hunted all over in this country. I've hunted in Africa. I've hunted in Alaska. I've been all over, and every place I've ever gone, it's a game and fish agency. It's not 2. So, whatever you do, but they try to hang me, as evident from this. So, I'm still here, by the way. Yeah. So anyway, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Chairman Gottschall. We appreciate the historical perspective, and thank you for being here with us today. At this point, I'm going to call up Phil Durgan and Patricia Berger from the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee, and if you folks would come forward and explain the study that you've performed, and then we'd go to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Philip Durgan. I'm the Executive Director of the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee. This is Patricia Berger, who's our Senior Counsel and also is a Project Manager for a number of studies, including this study, which we released in March of this year. If it's okay with the committee, I'll just going to ask Pat to get right into it, and we can talk about the findings.
Good morning. House Resolution 2013-129 directed us, to study the feasibility of a combined Fish and Wildlife Commission for Pennsylvania. As part of this study, we were also asked to include an analysis of the cost of combining solely the law enforcement functions of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission and the Pennsylvania Game Commission with the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. This is the 3rd study we have conducted regarding a merger of the Fish and Boat Commission and the Game Commission. Pennsylvania, as Representative Gottschall noted, remains the only state with separate and organizationally independent agencies managing its fish and wildlife resources. In 20 states, those functions are managed by a standalone department or commission, and in 29 states, they are managed within an organizational unit of a larger state agency, such as a Department of Natural Resources. Although the management of these resources by a single entity is certainly feasible, the combined expenditure per license of the Fish and Boat Commission and the Game Commission is already lower than the average of other states, suggesting that there may be limited opportunities for significant savings. In addition, since our last report, both agencies have seen a decrease in their complements, which also limits the personnel savings that could be achieved in a merger. The organizational chart we developed for the merged agency is only a suggested framework, and our staffing analysis is also only an estimate. We did not eliminate any functional areas within the 2 agencies, and we assume any new commission would be given considerable flexibility to make adjustments as necessary within the new structure. The proposed new Fish, Boat, and Wildlife Commission would include 3 deputy executive directors, 1 each for resource management, administration, and field operations. We retain the regional office structure, using the Game Commission's regional offices as primary locations, with the Fish and Boat Commission's regional offices being repurposed for storage or additional staff. Our organizational structure also eliminates several redundant upper-level positions, such as executive director, press secretary, legislative liaison, and several regional office managers. Creates a Bureau of Species Diversity by combining the Wildlife Diversity Section and the Environmental Planning and Habitat Protection Division of the Game Commission, together with the Fish and Boat Commission's Division of Environmental Services. Provides for a dedicated law enforcement function for the renamed resource conservation officers. Maintains current staffing levels for the Game Commission's Bureau of Wildlife Habitat Management and the Fish and Boat Commission's Bureau of Engineering. Maintains current staffing levels for the Game Commission's Bureau of Wildlife Management and the Fish and Boat Commission's Bureau of Fisheries and Division of Hatcheries, and adds positions to replace the use of WCOs in certain programs. And it also retains both headquarters buildings, as neither is large enough to fully house a new merged agency. The proposed organizational structure eliminates a total of 52 positions. As the complements of both agencies have declined since our last study, the reduction in staff and savings to be achieved was also reduced to some extent. For example, in our 2003 report, we identified significant savings through a 36-person reduction in law enforcement officers. This was achieved by calculating the percentage of time spent on law enforcement versus non-law enforcement activities, with the thought being that non-law enforcement activities could be accomplished by other staff in lower paid positions. Using the same analysis for this report, we project an 18-person reduction in law enforcement officers. This lower figure is due primarily to the increase in the percentage of time WCOs report spending on law enforcement activities. We project that a merge agency, using the structure presented in this report, would save approximately $4.8 million annually in personnel costs. This includes approximately $1.75 million in savings at the headquarters level and a little over $3 million in reductions at the regional level. Our analysis, however, does not include the effect of requirements or bumping rights that may affect actual savings or certain other costs or savings, such as building renovation, cross-training, and IT migration costs that were beyond the scope of this studied estimate. Other potential savings and potential costs associated with the merger found include approximately $39,000 in savings due to reduced annual vehicle expenses, including maintenance costs, with an additional $13,698 in one-time savings due to the sale of excess vehicles. No significant new savings in the merged agency due to greater volume commodity purchasing, as both agencies use the Department of General Services purchasing guidelines and policies. Cross-training of all staff would be necessary, and according to the agency's officials, there would be significant costs associated with cross-training the law enforcement staff, including costs for travel, housing, and subsistence. Transition to a new combined IT infrastructure will necessitate specialized expertise, and we expect that current staffing would remain in place to both maintain existing systems as well as participate in the merger. A single monthly magazine with topics related to wildlife, hunting, fishing, and boating may result in cost savings, in part as a result of reduction in the number of free copies distributed. The new merged agency would require a new logo, website, vehicle identification, and uniforms for law enforcement and certain other staff, but these changes could be phased in over several years. The identification of the law enforcement as being representative of the new agency may, however, need to be done in a shorter phased-in period. The Department of General Services estimated a one-time signage cost of $2 million, but did not provide estimates for a phased-in approach. In the case of a merger, it would be in the best interest of the Commonwealth to hire an outside consultant to guide the transition. We also identified several statutory, regulatory, and administrative matters that would need to be addressed in establishing a merged agency. These include size and composition of the governing body for the new agency, combining the Fish and Boat Code and the Game and Wildlife Code into one unified and consistent code, establishing uniform employment and retirement provisions for the new law enforcement officers. For example, currently Game Commission officers are covered under the binding arbitration provisions of Act 111, whereas Fish and Boat officers are covered under Act 195. Combining the regulations of the two commissions, and determining the fund structure of the new commission. We note that combining the fish, boat, and game funds into one fund would be more efficient, but it would also require the Commission's various constituencies to grant the new agency greater flexibility in how the funds are used. In addition to these issues, many of the staff of the two agencies we spoke with expressed concern over the possible dilution of the focus of their agency's mission and expertise if the two were merged. The resolution also asked us to look at new funding options for the two commissions. As you know, both commissions rely heavily on license and registration fees for a significant portion of their funding. Although sales of licenses have decreased over the last decade, total revenues for all funds have increased, with the game fund revenues in particular having benefited over the past 3 years from increased oil and gas rentals and royalties. The Fish and Boat Commission also received $1 million from the unconventional gas well fee to fund costs relating to review of permits for wells, as well as receiving a portion of the recent increase in liquid fuels tax funding. However, expenditures from each fund have also increased, primarily a result of increased personnel costs. In regard to new funding, we note that many states supplement license fees with other funding, such as general fund monies, certain sales taxes, and lottery funds. Our review also included an analysis of the cost-effectiveness of merging only the law enforcement functions of the Fish and Boat Commission and the Game Commission with the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We found, however, that in only 2 states, Alaska and Oregon, are these law enforcement functions carried out by an agency that does not have responsibility for the administration of the fish and wildlife programs. Also, DCNR reported that the focus of their park and forest rangers, is on providing a safe and enjoyable experience for the visiting public rather than on law enforcement. Therefore, combining the law enforcement functions may require a reorientation of the agency's approach to law enforcement, possibly with non-law enforcement staff assuming responsibility for visitor services. The issues I already mentioned regarding the merger of the Fish and Boat Commission and the Game Commission would similarly apply to the merger of the law enforcement function with DCNR. The jurisdiction of the merged law enforcement officers would need to be consistent. Union and Act 111 and Act 195 applicability would need to be addressed, and funding for the combined enforcement staff would need to be addressed in a way that would not jeopardize Fish and Boat Commission and Game Commission federal funding. Initial costs may also include creating a new law enforcement bureau and reporting system that does not currently exist in DCNR. Currently, the rangers report within the bureaus of parks and forests and may not actually be reporting to another law enforcement personnel. Primarily because we did not consider it feasible to continue the Commission's volunteer deputy programs in a new DCNR bureau, we estimated the cost of combining Fish and Boat, Game, and DCNR law enforcement to be about $5.8 million more than under the existing structures. A combined approach should, however, improve enforcement coverage, as currently officers typically only issue citations for violations relating to their own agencies. Before closing, we would like to thank Carl Rowe, former Executive Director of the Game Commission, Matt Ho, Executive Director of the Game Commission, John Arway, Executive Director of the Fish and Boat Commission, Ellen Ferretti, Secretary of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and their respective staffs for their excellent cooperation during this study. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Patricia. And now we'll turn to questions from the members. Are there any questions? I'll start out with a question then. In looking at the details of the study, can you talk a little bit more about the cost savings that you've calculated in the study?
Sure.
And one of the things that I noted in the details were that you chose to keep all the existing buildings, even out in the regional in the different regions, where it seems like that may be duplication also. How did you arrive at the number that you've arrived,
Okay.
at $4.8 million in cost savings?
Well, first, we came up with the structure that we thought we'd use, and the structure we used is similar, not identical, to what other states use. Every state does it differently, obviously, and so we took a structure that also worked with how the agencies are currently structured to a certain extent, the type of bureaus that they use and the way they break out administrative functions in one part, operational resource functions elsewhere. So we started with that structure. Then we looked at, I'm going to say some of the easier ones. You don't need 2 executive directors. However, we did find that you could use 3 deputy executive directors. And as we noted in here, although there was structurally, there were, I believe, 4, one of those positions was empty. So there wasn't really a savings associated with that. And that's the other thing that we found, and why I think the savings may be less than may have been anticipated. Some of the positions that were eliminated aren't filled positions. So although the position in the future would no longer be there, currently there is no savings associated with it because it's not filled. One of the key places that we looked for savings was with the law enforcement staff, since in both cases that accounts for approximately 20% of the costs of the organization. The analysis we did last time, as we noted, ended up with 36 WCOs that we felt could be eliminated if you shifted their function to a solely law enforcement function. At the time of our last study, the WCOs in the Game Commission had about 79% of their time on law enforcement, and by law enforcement we included law enforcement, clear law enforcement functions in the field issuing citations, that kind of work. Leave, vacation, sick leave, because regardless of what position they're in, you're still going to have to account for that leave. And then third, another category that we included for the general training, any kind of maintenance activities with your equipment or whatever that would be associated. So we thought that was a fair approach at that time, and we used a similar approach this time, so those 3 categories. This time, however, because the percentage of time that is spent on law enforcement had increased, for the Game Commission had increased from about 79% to around 89%, 90%, and the Fish and Boat Commission had been around 89%, I believe, in the last study, and was at like almost 93% this time. There was much less time that was being picked up by other staff, so there was much less time that we could eliminate positions for. So that's where, 10 years ago there were 18 additional positions that we thought could be eliminated. This time it's the 18 positions versus the 36. And that was done on a time and activity analysis for both agencies over, I believe we took a 3-year period of time so we could annualize it. So if there was, something that happened one particular year that we didn't have that drive our analysis. So that's that piece. Regarding the regional structure and why we're not specifically recommending the reduction there, first, the agencies own those facilities, so we wouldn't necessarily see the immediate savings of ending a lease. Also, in some cases, because of the locations not being as close to each other, we thought they may be useful for the seasonal staff, and therefore, until, we say this several times, and until the agency would get set up and structure itself and figure out what does actually work, that we look at this as kind of the starting point, we weren't quite sure if it would be reasonable to eliminate those facilities at this point in time. So that's how we did the analysis that we did, just looking at when you set it up with this structure, how many positions look to be specifically duplicated, and what, like I said, the big case being the enforcement position, which is such a large percentage of their funding. Another large percentage driver that we didn't eliminate positions from is the hatcheries. It's a large percentage for the Fish and Boat Commission, but we didn't see a way in a combined organization that you would really reduce that structure or that function.
So virtually all the savings were from personnel. Whatever the other savings were relatively minor in the other areas that as far as we could determine.
So through your analysis, you're you're looking more at separating law enforcement duties versus other duties
Correct.
that exist in the two commissions.
Correct.
When we know right now that WCOs in both agencies perform many more duties than just law enforcement.
Right.
And in particular, the Fish and Boat Commission needs more WCOs actually out in the field because they currently have a shortage. And so it's interesting that in your analysis, you're talking more about separating those duties and having law enforcement do their part and other staff do their part when maybe they could continue doing those broad range of duties and actually have more WCOs to perform those duties.
That's expensive, though, when you have, law enforcement officers
But you could
stocking fish.
You could cross-train them, though.
Right.
I mean, you could cross-train them to do duties of both game and fish.
Right. But you're paying them at the higher level.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. That's one approach, and that's the approach that's taken to some extent now. But we were looking at it more as the cost analysis and the large expense that the WCOs are at this point due to, in some cases, the training, the equipment, and in the case of like the Fish and Boat Commission, we mentioned earlier the difference in their retirement and the benefits there. So what you suggested is certainly if you cross-trained them for all of that, you could continue on that, continue with the number they currently have or even add to it, or use the deputy force, although the deputy force is used with the WCOs. They're not an independent force on their own. So
right. And I understand the way that you performed your analysis. I'm just saying there's another way to look at it also.
Absolutely.
The report projects a $4.8 million savings. The two commissions have basically said that was insignificant, but to the people that I represent, that is very significant. And actually, if we'd have moved forward with something of this nature when I was on the committee previously back in '03, that's the last time that you guys did the study, we would have saved several $1 million to this point. So I'll open up to other questions. Bob wanted. Chairman Gottschall.
I just have one question pertaining, I do remember back in '03, we had a major concern, and truthfully, of the letters I got from the various states, the same thing was maximization of federal funding, by coordination of efforts. And this was woven in and out of those letters continuously. If you have two different agencies, how can you maximize making sure you're getting the monies that you're supposed to get? We didn't have any maximization of efforts back in '03, but do we today?
We didn't specifically look at whether they were maximizing efforts with the federal funding, so
to obtain federal funding.
I'm unable to answer that question. We did retain the positions that work for the federal funding, and we thought they would need those going forward, even with a combined agency, but we did not look specifically at whether they are maximizing their federal funds and how they use them.
Yeah, the question was, Jen, are we getting the money that we're entitled to? And are we sure we're getting the money we're entitled to? And we don't have apparently an answer for that at this point.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Chairman Haluska.
Thank you. My question goes to the structure. When you look at these two organizations, we have 10 people on the Fish and Boat Commission board that meet quarterly. We have 8 people on the Game Commission board that meet quarterly. How do you take these two and put them together, and what kind of a board would they have that would run both agencies at once? Would they then have to meet more than quarterly? Because obviously, the Game Commission is consumed with their side of the issue. The Fish Commission is consumed with their side of the issue. When you merge these two agencies together, then you expect a volunteer board to meet probably not quarterly. You're going to have to meet much more often than that, because these meetings are going to get extended, substantially, I would think, to cover all the issues that the two agencies have to deal with. So in my mind, I just can't see you putting together a board of 8, 10, 12, 14 people that can volunteer their time to run both of these agencies with one executive director. I just don't see how that's going to happen. Obviously, Pennsylvania, I think, is second to Alaska with the number of miles of waterway. So we're not like a lot of other states that don't have a lot of streams to manage, a lot of lakes to manage. So I'm kind of thinking that in our hatchery system, I know we've had some questions about our hatchery system, but Pennsylvania is a trout state, and that's why people fish in Pennsylvania, the majority of them, because we raise trout, we stock trout. So that's a big issue for the Fish and Boat Commission, to maintain these hatcheries, to stock the streams, and as the streams become more viable, we actually want to see more fish produced, not less fish produced, so that we can do that. So in my mind, I just can't see how we're going to shrink this down to one board, quarterly meetings with one executive director, and cover all this territory. So that's something that, in the back of my mind says, no matter how much you save $1 million here or $1 million there, are you really going to have the product at the end that you really want in this state as far as hunting and fishing? There are some similarities, obviously, that fish and boat people can do, with the Game Commission, but there are a lot of things that are different. And I know you're talking about cross-training people, but most of the game wardens that I know, that I've dealt with, have a full load right now. Bear problems, deer problems, coyote problems, all kinds of issues that they would deal with. Boat safety, especially in the springtime, the fish, people are out checking for fire extinguishers, safety devices and everything. I just don't see how you're going to throw this in the shoulders of one person and say, go do it all and do it well. I just have a real problem with that.
Well, I can give you a little bit of information that we found with other states regarding the size of the board and meetings, and that the states that we surveyed, and we did survey all the states, and unfortunately we don't have information for them all, but the ones that responded to us, there are states. Arizona has the fewest number of board members. They have 5 board members, and they do both fish and wildlife. And North Carolina has a board of 19 members, and they also do fish and wildlife. In addition to that, many of them have multiple advisory bodies. So part of, I think, your concern could be addressed through advisory bodies. Currently, for example, the Fish and Boat Commission has the boat advisory body. So you might be able to do that. It's certainly a legitimate concern about how many meetings they would have to have in a year. I would expect when the agency if the agency were to be combined, that maybe the first year or so there may be more frequent meetings than quarterly, but it doesn't seem unusual for the other states to have boards that meet on a similar time frame as ours currently meet.
And it would be interesting to know in some of these other states like Arizona, just, what is their license sales, fishing and hunting, the total population of the state. I know some of those states obviously probably, aren't what Pennsylvania is as far as population. Some of the western states, of course.
Absolutely.
So, it makes a big difference.
I think we have some of that information in the report from other states.
On page 50,
it varies. Everything varies.
Right.
In terms of
56,
the
we have
size of
total licenses sold for the agencies that, again, responded to our questionnaire. And we sent it to the 20 states that have a combined independent. And Pennsylvania, and this is all licenses sold. So licenses, permits, not just a deer license, that kind of thing. And states like, California is close to what our combined is. They have 3.25 million.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand what you're saying. There are differences, obviously, from the states and the resources that they're managing.
Right. And obviously, some of the states, I don't know how many different animals, that they hunt in different states. Obviously, Pennsylvania has a variety, especially, you have the upland birds and small game. You have turkey. It's not considered a big game animal, but hunters pretty much consider it that. You have black bear, you have deer, and now you have elk. So, we're a state that has a lot, when you look at it. We have a lot. And, it's just, to me, it just seems like it would be over-encompassing to try to, make one individual manage all that out in the field. I just don't know how they do it.
And to make your point, we also do boats. And a lot of states have separate boat commissions. They may combine the fish and game, but their boat commission is separate. So, yeah, it would be a lot on the table, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
Representative Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to keep this brief. Some of it may be comments, but I do have a couple questions. With respect to your overall report, I know this is difficult to do what you people do, and it can be time-consuming, but to go to a point of a couple comments that you made here, was there a chance that through this report that we looked at sportsman's opinion?
We had done that in the 2003 report. We had sent out questionnaires. At that point, it was a very controversial topic. There was I believe at the time, there was either an actual bill pending to combine or certainly that to move that forward. This time around, we focused more on solely the cost savings associated with it. At the time, though, the key issues with the licensees had been that the state game lands wouldn't somehow be sold or used to fund a new agency, and that was not part of what we were looking at, and that the funding would still remain with a single agency that was doing just fish, boat, and game, that we looked solely at that type of a structure, not at a combined conservation and natural resources
So
structure.
I guess really the short answer is really no.
Not this time around.
Okay.
Yeah,
About previous reports that you may have conducted that had to do with either specific Fish Commission or Game Commission issues, how did they or did they not play into this?
Well, we had just completed the triennial Fish and Boat Commission review when we started this one. We completed that in 2013 and released it last September, and then we were already working on this report at the time. Additionally, we had completed the Game Commission triennial audit in, I believe it was February or March of 2012. So we were able to use that information in way of a lot of the information we needed for this report, and by that I mean kind of the background information we had, and we were able to build on that. We were not, however, in this report conducting a performance audit, so we weren't necessarily making comments regarding, in the last two, the Game Commission and then again in the Fish and Boat Commission that we just finished. In both cases there, we had focused on their compliance with their strategic plans and moving those plans forward. That didn't specifically factor into this report because it's not what we were asked to do here.
Okay, and I like that clarification. I do have to say, in all honesty, I'm a little troubled with that, but I realize the complication of this report and the investigation, if you will, what you would have to do. I think they're all very important. I think they all play into the decisions that are made within the agencies and the decisions that we have to look at to do this. I think there's another part of this where I think if you're looking at the cost, strictly the cost, I guess what I'm getting from this report in just short order is that there is a little bit of cost to some extent to join these agencies.
You mean savings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Depends on how you interpret $4.8 million.
Right.
But yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
I would
all right.
call it
Fair enough.
modest.
And I think that's good. So I guess to my point, there's a couple statements that I'm going to make that I know it comes out blunt, but that's what I do best. Because I think it gets the point across. I think the agencies have brought on a lot of the controversy in certain things that have been brought up in this committee and in the public, and I think this creates some of the push to look at other options. I am troubled by the fact that you folks have done a extensive report on what the loss of funds, quite frankly, to my question, on the deer management and what has happened with tree certification and all the other different complicated issues that have taken place. So if we look at $285 million per year by your report, opposed to a $5 million, 4.8 possible savings, I have a lot of trouble with that. And to my biggest and most directed concern across the board with respect to our sportsmen, we have just recently a quote from the Habitat Management Director just recently who has said that the program is all wrong. Okay, the deer management program is all wrong, which directly impacts the cost, the monies that we bring in, the number one pursued species. All of those things play into those statements. And then you have the sportsmen in his mind that are not being considered. That was one of the reasons I asked the first question.
I understand.
Okay? And then you went to employees, and the employees' concern was that the mission will be lost if it's not already in that direction of what the agencies are about. So that's the way I view it. I guess the quick part of this, if somebody's wondering, well, how does he feel on the merger of this? Well, I don't hold back with what I think is bad direction, and I think that my opinion and the things that I gather are directed that way. I don't support the merger for a lot of those reasons. I think that if we would have stayed on mission and we would look at where we could have been saving money, we wouldn't be having this discussion. That's just the end of my comments. Appreciate what you guys do, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think our report does reflect some of the concerns of the Commission about the loss of focus on the mission. I mean, we talk about that, from their perspective a little bit, but I understand what you're saying.
Thank you, Representative Maloney. Obviously, this is an issue that has many, many different components to it, and we've focused in the report significantly on cost, obviously, because that's something that's very important. To me, nearly $5 million in savings is significant. To the constituents that I represent, that's significant, and what that can be over time, and the amount of resources that can be pooled in support of sportsmen and anglers, across the state. But I realize that there are other factors that need to be considered, and certainly to Representative Maloney's point, the input of the sportsmen out there and their opinions are very important. As I said previously, I was on the committee in 2003, and I think we did nearly 10 hearings across the state on this particular topic, and people were really divided on the issue. Having been able to attend many of those hearings, we heard from sportsmen on the issue, and at that time it seemed to lean towards not pursuing a merger. I can tell you that since this study, had been requested, I've heard from sportsmen across the state who said that in the past they did not support it, but now they think that because of the direction of the two commissions, that they had changed their opinion and were in fact supporting the concept of merging the two commissions. So public opinion does change over time, but I recognize that there are many factors to consider, and along with that is the fact that Pennsylvania is very slow to change, and anybody that works in this building for any significant period of time knows that change occurs very slow here. But just the fact that every other state is able to pool their resources and have one agency that's focused on both game and fish is something that, to me, signals that we need to take a look at this issue, and that's why I requested the study. And I appreciate the information that's been provided through your study. Are there any other questions from the members? Well, I think it's something that the committee will continue to look in great detail at your study and continue to look at those details and consider public opinion as we move forward with any potential legislation. So I want to thank you for coming before the committee this morning, and this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
you.